is something important for schools and for MTSS frameworks targeting behavior. Maybe you can articulate that to your colleagues back in your school, and certainly trying to get some of these things up and running. We're going to discuss some strategies that you can use to establish and maintain relationships. And then we're going to look at some tools and techniques that can be used to kind of measure relationships at your district, and also perhaps measure the impact of any strategies or interventions you decide to implement around relationships in your district as well. So those are the goals today and the overarching learning objectives for the session. So we're first going to start discussing why relationships are important and why we should focus on them, and maybe why we should make them a systemic priority. We know there's a lot of competing initiatives in schools, right? A lot of things that we're trying to get done, being asked to get done by various stakeholders, being mandated to get done in terms of like state and federal education law and things like that. So I think anytime you want to maybe perhaps implement something in a school, it's really good maybe to be able to articulate why should we devote time, energy, and resources to this as opposed to something else, or in addition to all the other things we're being asked to do in a school. So for one thing, relationships, as it doesn't necessarily make intuitive sense right away, but relationships do have a pretty strong impact on student achievement, okay? So if we look at the diagram here in terms of effect sizes from research, generally in this research, this is John Hattie's research from the Visible Learning, where they looked at over 800 studies and did a synthesis on the effect size for those. So I think everyone's probably pretty familiar with that. And this cutoff of 0.4 here in the effect size, they established that was kind of the average effect size of all the studies, right? So anything to the right of that kind of exceeded the average of what was reviewed in the studies, and is considered kind of in the zone of where we want to be, right? A practice that we want to spend time implementing should put us over here, because that's going to get us results that are meaningful and worth investing in, right? So, and just in case you're unclear on how to interpret effect sizes, so an effect size is a proportion of a standard deviation. So an effect size of here, like 0.72, means that the control group, the experimental group exceeded the control group by 0.72 standard deviation units, which basically means that they perform better than 71% on average, 71% of a standard deviation better than the average performance in the control group. So if we think about maybe the easiest way to think about that, a lot of us deal with standardized tests in education, so we're all very familiar with that, right? So a standard deviation on a standard score scale is 15 points, right? So thinking about that, that's about a difference of 12 standard score points difference between the experimental group and the control group. So that's a pretty big shift, right? And if we're thinking about, depending on where kids are falling on their achievement, that can be the difference between being average and below average, and being in a range that potentially might consider you for special education and not. Like, that's a pretty big swing in student achievement there to get an effect size of 0.72. And that was the effect size that those meta-analyses found that teacher-student relationship had on student learning, right? So it not only exceeded the average of all the interventions studied, that effect size is approaching, that's a really solid effect size. Not even all academic interventions that target actual academic skills will produce an effect size of that magnitude. So that's pretty good stuff. And another thing too is there's research has time and time again documented that one stable and committed adult relationship in a child's life is a huge factor in resilience and overcoming adverse experiences that they may be experiencing, family, community, etc. So relationships are pretty powerful things. In terms of discipline, right, and thinking about MTSS and behavior and PBIS frameworks too, there's been a lot of research that has found that high quality teacher relationships result in fewer discipline problems and rule violations in the classroom, right? So that's helpful. The less time you're spending dealing with disruptive behaviors or rule-breaking behavior, the less you're having to stop instruction to deal with those things, the more time that you can teach. And again, just back to John Hattie's work too, thinking about a low intensity strategy, such as just building relationships with students that yields a high leverage result in student achievement. That's a fairly low investment in terms of resources and a pretty high return in terms of student results as well. So something that doesn't seem to have a direct impact on academics, and in the end does have a huge impact on how a classroom can be run and the achievement that you can get out of that classroom. And then back to the resiliency factor too, just kind of expanding on that. This study by O'Connor and colleagues was interesting because it had pretty significant findings. So the first is what they found is that high quality teacher-child relationships, not only did it predict lower levels of externalizing behavior, it kind of moderated the trajectory of those behaviors as well. So that study found that students who experienced higher levels of externalizing behavior, but also had higher quality teacher relationships in 1st through 5th grade, ended up showing a decreasing trajectory of externalizing behaviors, which is different than the typical trajectory for those students, right? The typical trajectory is that they will eventually show some improvements in externalizing behaviors, most of them, but they tend, in terms of normative status, still tend to rank higher than other students. So this study actually got them to on a different trajectory where those externalizing behaviors lowered over the course of time instead of remaining somewhat constant and steady. Secondly, it really helped students with internalizing problems. And these students in early elementary schools tend not to cause too many problems that get the attention of educators, but can go unnoticed and have pretty significant problems later on in life in terms of adolescence and adulthood. And the other thing that this study found is that high quality teacher-student relationships served as a protective factor for students with internalizing behaviors. And that, again, it altered that trajectory of having further problems down the road and resulted in improved long-term trajectories for students with internalizing behaviors. So, that's some pretty powerful stuff, right? And then back to the resiliency with that kind of single most common factor with resilience is that committed relationship with a supportive parent, adult, or caregiver, right? Thinking about many of the things that our students bring to school with us, right, that are in their backgrounds. We've all heard a great deal about trauma, particularly over the pandemic, access to resources. I think in education, we're all very well aware of risk factors that students have and come to school with. The issue with those risk factors, while they may identify a pool of students that we maybe need to be concerned about, is most of those factors are not alterable variables by the school, right? We can't change a student's socioeconomic demographic background. We can't change their family structure. We can certainly offer assistance to families and supports when they need it, but whether they choose to follow through on that and how effective those supports end up being, that's well beyond the control of the school. But one thing that schools can do is focus on resiliency and identifying students who may be in need of that committed, stable relationship with an adult and a caregiver. So framing these things from a resiliency standpoint and focusing on building relationships with students is a variable that's under schools' control and has been shown to be very valuable in supporting students that come to us with a multitude of risk factors. All right. And then, so how do we make a systemic priority for relationships? And the best way to do that is through our PBIS framework with our data, practices, and systems kind of spheres, right? So data is going to help us identify maybe where and what type of problems may exist in our system in terms of establishing relationships. And we're conceptualizing this a little broad here. Sean is going to touch on that a little bit later in the presentation, but we're talking about relationships with student to student, student to teacher, school, community, family, like all the different relationships that influence how successful a school can be, right? So we're going to use data to identify maybe how well we're establishing those various types of relationships. We're going to support students and teachers with the practices that we need to give them the skills or to target the areas that we need to develop those relationships. And then we're using our systems to kind of monitor the fidelity of that And then we're back to data, right? We need to measure how well our interventions and supports are doing. So data is going to be key for that as well. And our systems are also going to be important too, because we may need to match intensity of intervention with intensity of need, right? So certain students are going to have a higher need perhaps for that committed adult relationship. And certain groups of students, we may need to target more in trying to establish those relationships with them. So our MTSS systems and framework will give us the ability to match those students with the type of support that they need. Right. And then we are, again, strengthening relationships, and hopefully we're measuring that in that outcome of improved social competence and academic achievement. All those. So some of the basic practices in an MTS include some of the following things, right? So at the core level, we need expectations for high quality research and evidence-based instruction in all of our classrooms, right? That should be a guarantee that every student gets walking through the door, and that's just what we provide. We're also going to need that universal screening in order to identify who may need additional support, and also to evaluate how well those universal supports are doing. We need to have some screening tools so that we can see how many students are responding to what's in place and how many students are going to need some type of additional support at the advanced tier level. We're looking for a collaborative, team-based approach to develop, implement, and evaluate those implementations. We want to have voices and participation from all of our stakeholders and representation at those meetings, because that's going to help us achieve buy-in for the practices that we're going to need people to implement. The kind of, I think, hallmark criteria or the component of an MTSS is that increasingly intense multi-tiered application of an array of high quality evidence-based instruction matched to individual needs, right? So as student need increases, our intervention intensity and measurement needs to increase as well. And that's having a continuum of services that can meet the variety and the diverse needs that your students are going to come to school with. And then there's the continuous progress monitoring, right? It's not good enough to put something in place. We need to monitor the progress of that, right? Because if we don't measure what we're doing and we don't measure the fidelity of what we're doing, if we get successful results, we don't know how to replicate that, right? But when we implement and we measure fidelity and we measure outcomes, then we can take what we did, what was successful, and we can replicate that. We can find what wasn't successful and we can tweak it and improve it so it is successful. All right, and then this is important too, particularly in relationships, is those expectations for parent involvement throughout the process, right? We know that family engagement, again, is one of those things. It's kind of hard to operationalize and measure, but when we have it, strong family engagement supports strong student achievement. So typically high achieving schools and successful schools have a strong family engagement component in their day-to-day functioning. Right? And at the core of all that is relationships, right? None of this gets done without relationships. Relationships with staff, to get them to commit to MTSS and PBIS models, to get them to commit to practices and sustainability, relationships with students, relationships with families, and relationships with community members. Ties all this together. This is not done in isolation or by a single person. It's all done by a group of people working together in a system. We're all interconnected. Sean is going to talk about some PBIS practices next.
All right, thank you, Drew. So as Drew talked about, we are going to be moving beyond just the student to teacher relationship and really think about building relationships between colleague to colleague, teacher to student, student to student, school to family, school to community. So on our next slide, if you please. We are going to ask you to utilize a tool called Padlet, and I'm going to put the link to the Padlet in the chat for you. So if you click on this link to this Padlet, Drew, if you want to go ahead and switch over to the Padlet, there are different columns. So the first column is the colleague to colleague column. Next to that is staff, teacher to student, student to student, school to family, school to community. So what I'd like you to do is if you just double click on the Padlet, you should be able to open up a sticky note. And what are some of the practices that your building or your district or within your context that you're already utilizing to support these different types of relationships? And I see you all logging onto the Padlet. I can see you up there on the screen. So thank you. So we already have some up here. So go ahead and brainstorm. Make sure you bookmark the Padlet because there are also resources and our presentation is on the Padlet as well. But I'm going to give you a few minutes to put down what strategies are you currently using. Okay, class meetings, community circles. All right, I'm glad to see some colleague to colleague strategies. Ooh, home visits, nice. Back to school night. Community meetings, that's wonderful. How about some more school to community strategies that folks are using? Okay, build a relationship between community partners and school through interdisciplinary IEP meetings, 504 meetings, nice. Back to school bashes, having community schools, that's wonderful. Okay, staff to teacher morning greetings, weekly celebrations at grade levels, wonderful. How about 30 more seconds? Anything else you'd like to put up on the Padlet, strategies that you are currently using that you'd like to share with the group? Ooh, lunch with the principal, that's always nice. Implementing community circles at staff meetings. And as you're reading through some of your colleagues' posts, if you want to like their posts, you can click on that heart and give them a like if this is maybe a strategy you haven't heard before, or maybe something you'd like to, know more about. All right, so while I have you on this Padlet, please make sure you bookmark it. Over to the right, there is a column for resources. So the resources that we utilize to create this presentation are available to you on the Padlet, as well as a PDF version of the slide deck. So if you wanted to have the slides for your own use or review, they are in the presentation column. And once again, our resources for today are on the resources column. So if you take us back to the slide deck, Drew. Thank you. So let's think about these colleague to colleague relationships on the next slide, please. So thinking about PBIS and thinking about the PBIS structure, one of the frameworks that we think about when we talk about effective organizations is that we want to develop an organization that has a common language, a common experience, and a common vision and values. And this is something that should be shared between staff, with families, and with students. And we're seeing that what helps support all of this is quality leadership. And this might be quality leadership through a building principal. It could be quality leadership through your PBIS team or your MTSS team. So some of the strategies that we know are encapsulated in PBIS, having that staff acknowledgement system. So I know as a PBIS facilitator, sometimes that's something that might get overlooked or missed or kind of pushed to the side, but we really want to create that staff acknowledgement system because we know we're really helping to change adult behavior within our system in order to change outcomes for students. So we definitely want to make sure that we're taking time to develop and utilize staff acknowledgement systems. How are we utilizing teaming within our buildings? Are we doing grade level teamings? Are we doing job alike teamings? So are we taking time for teaming opportunities throughout the building? We want to make sure that we're sharing our data. We can help with buy-in through the sharing of data so that colleagues understand this is what we've been working on. These are strategies that we've put into place, and these are the outcomes that we're seeing for students. So we want to make sure that we're systematically sharing data either at grade level team meetings, department meetings, or staff meetings. Also thinking about opportunities for staff feedback. So we know that because we want to have that common vision, common values, we always want to seek feedback from our stakeholders, including our colleagues. So there are opportunities for staff feedback. PBIS assessment uses the school safety survey, which gives teacher perceptions on school and community safety. And it's a useful tool that your PBIS team can utilize to help increase protective factors in your community and your school. There's also the self-assessment survey, which is once again a perception survey that's completed by staff in order to see what priorities to staff have around PBIS implementation, as well as what degree do staff perceive certain components of PBIS are being implemented within the building. And once again, that's an opportunity for planning by your PBIS team or your MTSS team. And finally, completion of yearly fidelity assessments. So I'm sure you're familiar with the various fidelity tools that you can utilize to monitor PBIS implementations, whether you're using the tiered fidelity inventory, the benchmarks of quality. These are tools that are important that we're looking at on a yearly basis, and also sharing those results with our colleagues so we can action plan as a team in order to increase our implementation and improve outcomes for students. So next slide, please. So Drew talked about the importance of those teacher-to-student relationships. And we want to make sure that when we're thinking about PBIS implementation, we are really thinking about all adults and all students. So the expectation is that every adult in the building is participating in the PBIS implementation process, whether that is delivering of those PBIS lessons, utilizing acknowledgement systems with all students, maybe in the classroom using a strategy such as behavior-specific praise, which is once a low effort, low cost strategy that has shown to positively impact student behavior. How about utilization of classroom management plans to establish and maintain relationships with students? Using classroom management plans to make sure that we are effectively communicating expectations to students, that we're effectively teaching those classroom lessons for both behaviors and academics, that we have an acknowledgement systems that are created within our classroom settings that are layered in order to acknowledge the group, small groups of students, and individual students as well, that we have plans that include instructional choice. We talked about the importance of instructional engagement, and we should be intentional that we are creating instructional choice that allows all students to engage in our lessons and engage in instruction. And positive greetings at the door. I believe on our Padlet, someone talked about morning greetings. Positive greetings at the door is another strategy that can be utilized in an effort to systematically create relationships with students. And we've included a resource on the Padlet on how to utilize that strategy within your classrooms. Next slide, please. So what are some questions that teachers might need to consider when they're thinking about establishing and maintaining relationships with students? So thinking about how do relationships differ across age groups? How does race or ethnicity affect relationships? And then how can I strengthen relationships with students? Like what skills might I need as a teacher? So considering the developmental age of the student, We know that children before adolescence rely heavily upon adult direction, and having a relationship with a teacher who assumes more of the responsibility in the decision-making process is developmentally appropriate for children in preschool through early elementary grades. When students get to middle school or high school, these students typically have fewer meaningful student-teacher interactions, while developmentally, they actually need more support as they transition into the larger, more competitive learning environments and contexts. So when teachers are able to build relationships with their high school students and create a classroom environment that is structured, yet meets the adolescent need for exploration, autonomy, and self-expression, these students are more likely to respond to things like corrective feedback. So thinking about the developmental needs of students across the grade levels. We also want to make sure that race and ethnicity for students is also being considered, because it has been identified as a factor in the development of student-teacher relationships. And research has shown that teachers, sometimes there are differences with expectations for students, how certain groups of students might be disciplined, how certain groups of students might be referred for special education supports or identified as gifted. So one strategy to increase a sense of inclusiveness for students of color is for teachers to convey genuine empathy with all students, to really work to build trust and communicate high expectations for all. And then finally, there are 4 areas that are associated with building a teacher's capacity for both establishing and maintaining meaningful relationships with students. So teachers having knowledge and thoughts about their interactions with students, so being self-reflective, having access to relational supports among colleagues, so having that collegial relationship to help the student to teacher relationship, having opportunities for teachers to receive regular structured feedback about their interactions with students, and then having your own objectives. What do you want? What are your goals for improving interactions with students? And what data are you collecting to show that you are meeting those goals? So there is a resource on the Padlet. It's called the PBIS Forum Practice Brief, and it actually provides you with 3 research-based interventions that can be put into place to address building teacher skills on increasing and improving relationships with students. So make sure you check that brief out. Okay, next slide, please. So now we want to think about that relationship between the school and the family/community. So think about some of those goals you might have. So one of your goals might be to create a family-like school. And a family-like school recognizes that each child's individuality makes each child feel special and included. So we want to have schools that welcome all families and not just those that are easy to reach. A second goal might be creating school-like families. And a school-like family recognizes that each child is also a student, and it helps families to reinforce the importance of school, homework, and activities that build student skills and feelings of success. And then finally, we want to create school and family-like communities. So communities that are including groups of parents working together to create school-like opportunities, events, programs that reinforce, recognize, and reward students for good progress, creativity, and contributions. And then also communities also create family-like settings by offering services and events to enable families to better support their children. So one of the frameworks that a school could look at adopting is Joyce Epstein's 6 types of parent involvement. And we do have a link to this on the Padlet as well. So when we think about the 6 types of involvement that a school could utilize, type 1 is parenting, which is really thinking about the family practices and home environments that support children as students. So when schools understand their children's families, thinking about communication. So that occurs when educators, students, and families design effective 2-way communication. So how are we being intentional about communication? The next type is volunteering. So this type of involvement occurs when educators, students, and family work together to recruit and organize parent help and support. So it counts parents as an audience for their students' activities. Thinking about learning at home. This occurs when information, ideas, or training are provided to educate families about how they can help support students at home with homework and other curriculum-related activities, including decisions and planning. Speaking about decisions, how are we involving parents in decision making? So we want to make sure that we're including parents in school decisions, getting their feedback, and also developing parents as leaders and representatives. And then finally, collaborating with the community. So this involvement occurs when community services, resources, and partners are integrated into the educational process to strengthen school programs, family practices, and the student learning environment. So next slide, please. So what are some things that you could possibly think about when we're thinking about the family community? So that homeschool collaboration and communication, and you guys listed a lot of these on the Padlet already. So I think we're most familiar with having conferences with family, but also thinking about additional school events and maybe highlighting community supports or inviting community vendors to those school events like a back to school night. So what are maybe having health agencies represented, mental health agency represented, social services, and maybe some other vendors available to parents to have access to or just receive information about. Another strategy, a lot of you are probably implementing check-in, check-out that uses a daily point card. So how can we utilize that as a communication strategy with families? Checking connect mentors or using Renew, which is a method of person-centered planning. So having those mentors that are connected both to the school, the family, and the community to support student outcomes. Thinking about interconnected systems framework, which is something that is becoming more and more used with PBIS implementation, when we're making those intentional connections with mental health providers within our schools to really look at how can we support students across all three tiers within an interconnected system. Developing parent advisory councils. How are we involving parents at the district level and the building level in order to have their input as we're making real-time decisions for students. And then finally, an idea of collaborative homework is one of the strategies that Joyce Epstein talks about within her framework is having parents not necessarily helping students with their homework, but being interactive with the homework. So how can we get family members, those who are living at home with the student, connected to their homework by maybe asking a question about their experience with a topic or their history or their experience that they can bring to a student's homework. Next slide, please. So we want to be sure that we are making considerations when we're thinking about the family and community, about the diverse families that we're serving. So there is a brand new publication via PBIS.org, and we do have this on our Padlet, and it's entitled Enhancing Family School Collaboration with Diverse Families. And this was just released a few months ago, so in June 2020, so at 2021. So it is hot off the presses. So we do know that there are challenges to engaging culturally, linguistically, and racially diverse families in the educational experiences of their child. However, these challenges can be addressed through changes or enhancement to your current systems and policies. So really be willing to operate from the with perspective by building bridges and crossing borders to cultivate a welcoming environment for families. So by having these bridges, it can help with PBIS implementation and also help to understand the community from which families come. So we want to always be careful of assumptions and perspectives that we might have. We want to be authentic and intentional about wanting to know what school means to families. And we want to make sure that we're valuing families and weaving them into the fabric of the school culture. So valuing families as partners and offering authentic invitations to families that include translation services, flexibility with locations and schedules, and offering necessary supports to allow for full participation and engagement will all be important when we're working with all families, not just diverse families. So the first thing is thinking about how to connect with the school community. I had the opportunity to work in a district that had a very diverse community. And one of the things that we did, we had a large Somali population. And one of the first things that we did as a district and on the school level is reach out to leaders within the community. So we wanted to make sure that we were visible outside of the school within our local community. We talked to community leaders about specific concerns that they might have about their student being a part of our public school system. So one of the things that we did when working with our Somali community and working with the community leaders and having an understanding of some of their concerns around the food that we would be offering in our cafeteria, modesty for their female children, et cetera. So some of the things we adopted was we removed pork from all menus to make our students feel comfortable about eating in our cafeterias. For some of our schools, we had separate gym for our female students, so they felt comfortable changing and participating in gym for their modesty. We were reflective of their religious needs. So if there were times where some of our students were fasting, we gave them opportunities to not have to be into the cafeteria at lunch and to rest during the day. We also provided a specific area of the building where some of our students could go and pray during the day in order to help them observe their religious beliefs. And we were able to do that pretty easily through making those connections with community leaders. So think about that as a possible strategy if you're not already utilizing those. Next slide, please. Next, we want to think about communication. I think this is probably something we all think about a lot, thinking about students whose first language may not be English. So thinking about securing multiple methods of two-way communication for families. That might be email, telephone, postmail, face-to-face communications. And now one of the benefits of virtual learning is we are learning to utilize platforms such as Zoom or Google Meets as different opportunities for families to give us two-way communications. I know we have a lot of buildings that utilize Classroom Dojo as a way to communicate with our families because it has built-in translations. But we also want to make sure and understand that there are some families that may not be able to read in their native language. So we have to think about what are options for those families who might not be literate in their home language. And once again, this is why reaching out to community leaders will be helpful in thinking of ways to have effective two-way communication with all of our families. We want to make sure that we do have opportunities to ensure family preferences and how they're communicated with, and that we utilize those whenever possible. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. I'm just seeing that there's some things in the chat, so we will have opportunity for questions or feedback in just a couple of minutes before we do one more section. So next, thinking about establishing and maintaining relationships, you want to develop that systemic process for shared decision-making. And we talked about this earlier. So making sure you're seeking input and involvement on decision-making committees and boards. One of the districts I worked in, they would create opportunities at the building level to really invite some of our parents who maybe needed translation, et cetera. One of our principals had a Somali family feedback group and really made sure that there were translators available. They invited a lot of our Somali families in once a month to really get their feedback on their experiences within the building level. in regards to how their students were able to participate, how they were feeling supported at the building level. So just think about those opportunities that we are making for our families, making sure we're collaborating with a diverse group of families, not just those families who show up, that we're going to get out there and get after our hard to reach families, making sure that we're reviewing things like the student code of conduct, thinking about things like dress code. Are they inclusive to the needs of various cultures? Considering our current practices, for example, how are students being identified for supports? Is it teacher nomination? Is it parent nomination? Are all parents being educated about how they can access services for students? So we want to make sure that we are thinking of ways that we can engage our diverse families. And once again, you can definitely utilize this tool, enhancing family and school collaboration with diverse families, as an additional support for your districts or your buildings. One of the things Drew and I wanted to do is really give you a tool for kind of doing an audit. So on the Padlet, we just kind of listed the various strategies that we're already using, but we also wanted to give you this example to think about how are we creating that systematic priority across the tiers. So are all of our strategies really focused on universal practices, so for all families? But what are we doing for small groups of families or small groups of students? And then what are we doing that's individualized? So those most hard to reach families, or for our most needy students, what are our strategies? So in this example, some of the universal strategies, we had home visits for all students could be a universal strategy. And I did see that on the Padlet. Having advisory, which is another strategy you guys already wrote about on the Padlet, but also utilizing greetings for students upon arrival. Someone had reading buddies across the building. Tier 2 strategies might be utilizing skills groups, helping student-to-student relationships by teaching peer mediation, utilizing check-in, check-out as a way to create staff to student relationships and parent to school relationships. And then finally on tier 3, utilizing Check and Connect, which is an intervention that uses mentors to really bridge the gap between families, students, and school. So wonderful strategy that can be used as a tier 3 strategy to help build relationships across the tiers. So I want to be cognizant of our time. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to do this, but this was something we can do pretty quickly and utilize the chat. So we did give you this in the Padlet as kind of a blank tool that you could utilize back at your buildings to kind of do an audit to see what are we doing at tiers 1, 2, and 3 in order to create relationships, establish and maintain relationships across the tiers. So asking yourselves, what are practices are currently in place that we're utilizing to build relationships with students, families, and community partners? And then what practices might we want to adopt? So maybe there were some new practices that we talked about today, or maybe a framework that you might want to explore that can help you change maybe or tweak some of the strategies that you're currently utilizing within your building. So we want to make sure and give you this tool. I'm going to turn it back over to Drew because I want to make sure we get to all of our content for this session. But as we are kind of transitioning back, were there any questions in the chat, Tammy, that we would need to address?
There was a comment that just said the engagement is definitely, let me back up. Weaving families into the school culture has an altered meaning in COVID times. My is not allowing parents and visitors on campus at this time. And I had responded with very true. We've had to learn and are continuing to learn how to make the school community outside of the brick and mortar building, not making the building the focus of the school community. And yet, as you had mentioned, we can do things for our students who are already in our buildings that extend that school culture to their families and homes. And then the response was the engagement is definitely doable, but not everyone thinks outside the campus or is willing to change their deeply entrenched engagement practices. As the school social worker, I find it so frustrating to try to implement new ideas when teachers and staff are pushing back.
I think that's definitely true. And COVID has, I think, stretched a lot of schools. One of the things a district I've supported in the past has started doing is streaming. They've done a lot of live streaming of events, whether it is sports events. They had some academic competitions within their schools, students doing presentations. And so they did live streaming of those events for families that weren't able to physically come to the building, whether it be because of work schedules, COVID, et cetera. So really utilizing technology in order to make those connections with families. And I know as a parent who, works a 9 to 5 and isn't always able to quickly get to my child's school, it's always nice when I was able to stream. And even with COVID and having a senior graduating, the fact that they were streaming graduations this year was able to really expand the community for my own child across state lines, and having family members be able to participate in things that they wouldn't normally do. So I take that point from the chat that we really do need to stretch what it means to be engaged, especially through COVID. And I hope that some of those practices will continue as we are returning more to face-to-face. And I'm going to turn this over to you, Drew.
Okay. We're going to spend the last 10 or so minutes here talking about how we can use data to support building relationships. So relationships are kind of not like a very concrete, tangible thing that perhaps is really easy to measure, right? Like you can't necessarily count it like a discipline referral or an attendance. It's not like a screening measure or like a Dibbles or Ames where you're getting there's this concrete thing that you're kind of measuring. So getting at that maybe is a little tricky and not entirely clear at first, but there are some things that we can do to kind of identify students and not just student relationships, but other areas of relationships that maybe need priority in our system. And we can use data and our PBIS teaming structures to do that. All right. I'll go back one. So this one, you may be familiar with this. This is the sticker experiment. So what this entails is basically taking pictures of students at the school, or if less resource intensive, might just be a list of names of the students in the school, right? And gathering your staff and faculty, and I would include all staff in this because of the nature of it, not just teachers. I would get all your staff and faculty there for this if you wanted to do this. And then you have to define with them what a good relationship is, right? Like define what a relationship is. And then the staff and faculty put a sticker on each student that they have a positive, strong relationship with, right? And what you're looking for is to find the students with no stickers, right? Because generally those are students that are probably lacking relationships in the school. And I would venture to guess they're having some kind of engagement issue with school as well, whether it be behavioral, academic, or cognitive. These are probably students that people probably have some concerns about if no one in the building feels like they have a strong connection with the student. And sometimes those students, they can go unnoticed and they can have some pretty detrimental outcomes, right? Students with externalizing problems, right, they catch our attention. And they may not have great relationships with everybody in the building, but they generally get noticed enough that there's somebody there that child can connect with and work with. It's kind of some of those other students that maybe don't rise to that level of notice, but also don't have the relationships that you really want to kind of maybe find through this method. And so I don't know what maybe the technical adequacy is around this, the reliability, sensitivity, specificity, but we're not trying to make high stakes decisions here. We're just looking for students who we may need to be a little bit more intentional about making a connection with. And so I like this because it puts a name and a face and it identifies a tangible group of students that you can then target with some type of support or intervention around just getting them connected to an adult at the school. And then some other things you can use are your school climate surveys. And the PBIS school climate surveys are really nice and can really help you with this as well on PBIS apps. And they're generally brief. They take about 10 to 15 minutes to administer. And what's really nice about that is you can kind of get beyond just the student kind of level with that. You can get school personnel input and you can get family input as well. So you can kind of really use these surveys to get at all those different relationship types that Shonda had covered earlier. There's something in these surveys that you can kind of pull out as either a direct or an indirect kind of indication of how well your school may be doing with those various types of relationships. So the school climate survey for the elementary and the middle high school students definitely has some questions around peer and adult relationships. Basically tapping into how well they feel like they're treated by peers and get along with others, to some of there's like a direct question on there. I have an adult in the building that I can go to for help. So the way these are set up is you just kind of get a total score and then you have to analyze by item. You don't get subscales like you do with a lot of the measures, like the fidelity measures, but at that question level, you can look at those questions that are targeting peer and adult relationships, look at the mean scores for those, compare them to the other ratings and see if that's an area in your school that maybe needs some work. And you can connect that to some direct practices. If students are showing low level of peer-to-peer relationships, you can do some universal things to support social skills or just kind of community building, right? I know there's a lot of pressure. You come to school, you got to get the achievement results and the high stakes testing. And sometimes all that, and with all that pressure, what gets lost is that kids really do have social needs and can benefit from some time interacting with the adults and peers in a non-academic way. So that's a great tool for that. When you look at the family one, the interpersonal relationships tab here is a good one to look at. This doesn't necessarily directly measure school to family relationships, but this is getting families' perceptions about how they feel their students are treated in school, if they're treated like fairly and with respect by both peers and teachers. So you can kind of look at that as well. And the neat thing about this one is that this one you can break down by different demographic factors. And one of the ones that you can look at with this is by race or ethnicity. Parent involvement is getting their perceptions of how well they're involved in school. So this is kind of where I would look if I were looking at how well are we doing with our school and family and community kind of relationships, because that should show up in here. Again, it's not a direct measure, but you could kind of look at this as a proxy of those school, family, community relationships and see how that's going. And then what's really neat, like I said, is you can break this out by race and ethnicity group and look at how different people from different cultural backgrounds, what are their perceptions about their involvement and what are their perceptions about how their students are treated by the other students in the school and the faculty there if you're looking at that interpersonal cluster, right? So this can be really helpful around looking for any kind of equitable issues in relationships and treatment that people may be experiencing or perceiving. And so just in this quick example here, you can see that, looking at this particular column here under Hispanic or Latino seems to be a little bit different from our white and Black or African American groups. So maybe you want to do a little bit more digging there and find out in terms of some of those strategies Shonda was talking about and engaging that community and getting their feedback and stakeholders involved. And then there's the school personnel strand to this as well that you can give. And here you have, again, those peer and adult relations, which is really looking at how students are interacting with each other and how teachers perceive students are interacting with them in the building. And then again, you have your your teacher's perception of parent involvement, which again, this may be a proxy of how well teachers and the family are feeling they're connecting with the families in your community as well. So these are just some sources of data that you can look at to kind of get like a baseline of how are we doing with these various types of relationships and maybe identifying some areas to systemically target. So looking at our data, we might find that, hey, we really need to target some student to teacher relationships. That's coming up in our student surveys, and our teacher surveys are not feeling like they're getting the respect and communication from the students that they need. You may find that you want to target issues with parent involvement and look at building relationships there as in a way to engage your families and communities. Whatever the survey data would tell you, you can pursue that. Which brings us to kind of our concluding slide here, which is the team-initiated problem solving, right? TIPS is an evidence-based meeting framework for use, and you can use it. It's very much used in PBIS, but it's really applicable to any type of MTSS or problem solving that you're doing, right? And TIPS is all about running efficient meetings that use data to clearly identify problems and match that problem to a solution, and then monitor the implementation of that solution and to determine how well that solution has impacted that problem. So a common use of TIPS in this framework is looking at office discipline referrals, and in that approach as well. But we can take the same approach using either perhaps the sticker experiment data or our school climate survey data to clearly identify a problem that we're having based on that data, and identifying a change for a goal for change, and then implementing solutions to try and bring that change about. And using the TIPS framework will help you probably really delve into that data, come up with good solutions, make sure those solutions get implemented, and then determine how they were effective and see, did we get the gains that we wanted, or do we need to revisit our problem solving process and come back with some different solutions? But at any rate, this will really help your teams kind of grapple with this data and identify some interventions and some supports that could be put in place. So again, I'm Drew Hunter, and Shonda was with me today, Shonda Talene. We are from PaTTAN. Our contact info is here if you have any questions and you want to follow up with us after the session. And we have 1 minute remaining. We're under 1 minute, so we could probably field a very simple question at this point. Or if not, again, you can contact us at the email above.
Yeah. And I'm just going to put the link back into the chat for the Padlet, which has all the resources we refer to, as well as the presentation and all of your strategies that you brainstormed. So thank you so much, everybody.
And Drew, if I could have you stop sharing for just a minute so I can share our final slide. So I just wanted to, again, thank Drew and Shonda for their presentation. I don't know about you, but I have a ton of notes and really, really good information that was in there. And just wanted to thank you on behalf of waOSPI for joining us. If you do have questions that come up, please email us and include the session name and the presenter in the subject line at cisl@k12.wa.us, and I will put that in the chat. And just a reminder to make sure that you bookmark that Padlet. And our next session does begin at 11 o'clock. And there's some information on the slide here about when the recording will be available, and how you can get your clock hours and that sort of information. So I'll leave this up for just a little bit longer. And I am still peeking at the chat in case there's any questions that happen to pop in. But thank you both so much. This was really, really good. Really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us.
Yeah, it was nice. It's very cool. We're glad we got to do this.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.